Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Right, in this video, we'll look at the introduction of statistics and we'll focus on what is statistic. Right. So, firstly, we'll go to the definition of statistics. All right. So, let's look at the next slide. All right. So, statistics is actually the science of collecting. So, we want to collect the data. All right. Organize the data, and we want to analyze the data, then we interpret and presenting it. So the keyword is actually the data. So we want to do something with the data, which is to kumpul, organize, susun, and then we want to analyze, menganalisis, interpret, kita tafsirkan data, and present the data. Kita membentangkan data itu. Baik, from all the process just now, so we can actually make a conclusion. We can make conclusion. Oh. All right, so we can make conclusion. What happens? Okay, so we can make conclusions, right? It's because we want to make conclusion, right? So we want to make conclusions. All right, so there are two types of statistics. So the first one will be the descriptive statistics, right? And the second one will be the inferential statistics. So what is descriptive statistics? Which is something to describe the data. So it deals with the collecting, summarizing, and also presenting the data to describe it, right? So usually it will be in the form of charts, graph, tables, or average. If it is numerical values, it will be average, percentage, and so on, all right? But when it comes to inferential statistic, which is something to make inference, which is to make conclusion about the population based on the information from the sample. So we want to make generalization based on the sample for the population, all right? So what is sample, what's population? We'll look in the next slide. All right, focus on techniques, how to draw the conclusion. Okay, dia mementingkan macam mana conclusion itu dibuat, kesimpulan itu dibuat, right? It is inferential statistics. All right, so let's look at the next one. Okay, so there are quite a lot number of terms in statistics that you have to understand and really memorize it. All right, so the first one will be the element. Element could be the object, people, or things where the measurement is taken. Like for example, we want to make a study on the performance of students. So in the element in this case is student. We want to test the size, to see the size of the trees in Gading. All right, so the trees will be the element. All right, so boleh jadi objek, boleh jadi manusia. Kita nak check this workers satisfaction level. So the element will be that workers itself. Okay, all right. So number 2, population. Population is all elements of group under study. Contoh kita nak buat kajian tentang pencapaian pelajar di UiTM Jengkel. So the population should be all students in UiTM Jengkel. Semua, seorang pun tak boleh terlepas. Student fakulti sains ke, fakulti sains komputer ke, fakulti perkaunan ke, fakulti peladangan ke, semua terlibat. Itu maksud population, all students. But the sample, kalau kita tak mampu nak buat semua, kita ambil sebahagian. Contoh tadi, okay, sample is subset or subgroup from the population. Like for example, if we want to make a study on the students of UiTM Jengkel, kita tak mampu semua, kita hanya pilih students from Faculty of Science. So that one would be the subset or subgroup from the population. So that one is called as sample. Okay, so basically kita ada population yang besar, bawah population kita ada sample. Alright, sample hanyalah sebahagian daripada population. Alright, census. What is census? Census is actually the study. So the keyword is the study. Alright, so census. Let's go back here. Right, census is actually the study conducted on every item of population. So study on population. If the study is involved all elements in the population, meaning to say that it is a census. But if it is a sample survey, it is actually a study on sample. Okay, study on population, we call it as census. Study on sample, we call it sample survey. Okay, so variables. Variables will be any characteristics which can be measured. Mana-mana sifat yang boleh diukur. We want to study on the student satisfaction. So student satisfaction will be the variable. We want to study on the students' performance in tests. So students' performance will be the characteristics that we want to measure. All right. So the data, collection of values, measurements or descriptions. Boleh jadi nilai ataupun huraian tentang benda itu. Okay. Data contoh ya. Kita nak kaji pencapaian pelajar. Alright, we want to study on the students' performance. So the variables is the students' performance, but the data yang diperlukan untuk kaji students' performance tadi ialah test marks, final exam grades, barulah data-data ini yang mewakili students' performance. Alright, so it can also be, the data can also be in form of descriptions. Why? Because bila kita buat survey, tak semestinya kita dapat nilai itu dalam bentuk values. Kadang-kadang kita minta dia punya pendapat. Contoh, kita nak kaji pendapat pelajar tentang kepuashatian pelajar di kafe. So, kita minta dia huraikan, nyatakan pendapat anda tentang kafe ini. Contoh ya. So, descriptions dikira sebagai data dalam kita punya kajian. Alright. So when we do the study on the population, kita akan dapat mean and standard deviation. Alright. So standard deviation. A mean and standard deviation. So this mean and standard deviation, we call it as summary measure. So if it is summary measure for population, we call it as parameter. But if it is summary measure for sample, maka kita panggil dia sebagai statistic. Please note that this word statistic is without S. No S here. Okay, statistic. Right. Okay, so we have pilot study, which is a study conducted before actual work. Kita nak buat kajian, tapi kita buat dulu soalan survey. Kita pilot study, kita test dengan kawan-kawan kita dulu. Nak check, why we have to do the pilot study before the actual work, actual field work, which is to identify problems. Nak kena pasti apa masalah yang wujud, ataupun to test out the questionnaires. Nak test soalan-soalan ni ada soalan sensitif tak? Kita kena check. Kan? Right. Contoh-contoh soalan sensitif, kita tanya dia. Contohnya kita tanya, mempunyai HIV ataupun tidak. Tidak boleh tanya. That one is sensitive. Ataupun kita tanya, parti politik mana yang kamu sokong di dalam PRU yang lepas. Tak boleh tanya. That one is sensitive because it is private and confidential. Okay. So you have to test out your questionnaires by doing the pilot study. Alright, so let's take this analogy here. Right, so the big one will be the population. So I'm going to write population here. Population. And the small one here will be the sample, because sample is just subset from the population. And that yellow dots here, that one will be the element, because dia adalah milik dalam population dan sample tadi. Alright, element. Okay, so if we do the study, right? So mana dah? Right now, kalau kita buat study on the population, okay, the study is called as, kita panggil dia sebagai, study on population would be a census, kan? Right. But the study on a sample would be the sample survey, right? Sample survey. And then we have the mean and standard deviation. For the population, if we have the summary measure, then one will be the parameter. All right. But for sample, the summary measure would be called as statistic. Please take note that this statistic without S. If you spell it with S, then that would be wrong. All right. Please carefully write the spelling for that one. Okay. All right. So let's look at this one. All right. Let's look at this example. A study was conducted to measure, right? So to measure the performance of students at UiTM in a statistics subject. That one we call it as objective, to measure the performance of students. So in this case, there are 500 students in UiTM and only 50 students selected to be the respondents. So what is the population? Of course, all these 500 students were, okay, all 500 students dekat mana ni? Alright, in ataupun at UiTM Rau. Okay, at UiTM Rau. So all 500 students, of course, 5 with S because it is plural. So the element is actually the students. Kita nak kaji siapa? Student. The element is the students. right? Then the variable, okay, I'll write the sample here. Sample kita hanya memilih 50, alright? So 50, all 50. Okay, all 50 selected students, right? In UITM row. What about the variable? Of course, the performance of students. Okay, performance of students in statistics subject, right? Performance. Ini yang kita nak kaji, of students in statistics subject. Okay. So what about the data? Data apa yang kita perlu kutip untuk mengkaji pencapaian pelajar? Of course, the exam marks or the test marks, exam grades. Boleh jadi banyak-banyak lah. Right? So exam marks. Like for example. Okay. So kena fikir sikit lah yang ni. Alright. So let's look at the next one. Right. If we attempt to collect the result of all students who took the subject, kita nak kutip semua keputusan pelajar yang ambil subjek itu, then the study is considered, alright, so please take note that it is a study, that's the keyword. Of all students, study on all students. So that one will be the, of course, the census, okay? Because it is a study, census is a study on all the item in the populations. Out of all 500 students, so all 500 students, we call it as a population, right? Uh-oh, it's not working here. Okay. Hello. Wait, yeah. So out of all 500 students, right? So of course that 500 students will be the population. It is easier to collect a subset or a subgroup. Okay, population, inshallah. Population. All population, all 500 students is the population. So, lebih senang kita nak kutip subset hanya sebahagian daripada mereka. Suppose we choose 50 out of 500 students, then the 50 students are considered as, of course, sebahagian daripada population, we call it as sample, right? Masya Allah. Okay, here. Sample, right. The mean for the population, mean is actually the summary measure. Mean is actually the summary measure. Okay. Mean for the population is a mean is a summary measure for population. We call it as a parameter. All right. The term describes the summary measures for the entire population. So of course, the summary measure for entire population would be the parameter. Ada R, parameter. All right. So if you calculate the mean for the sample, the term used to describe the measurement for sample would be the statistic. Okay. You have to memorize this. All right, so let's look at the next one. Okay, we have the sources of data. All right. So data can be divided into two. This first one will be the primary and the second one will be the secondary data. What is primary data? It is the first-hand data or raw data. Data mentah. Data yang belum digaul, dikacau lagi. Right? Apakah maksudnya? Right. So, ataupun bila you buat interview, you pergi tanya orang itu secara direct. Maklumat yang you dapat itu adalah first-hand data, primary data. Okay? You tak kacau lagi. But bila you dah pergi interview, you dapat first-hand data, you kacau-kacau sikit, tambah tokok buang, and so on. So, that one will be the secondary data. Bila you dah publish, okay? Data that has been collected, processed, and published. Dah proses, dah digaul, dah diterbitkan dalam newspaper, dalam economic reports, dalam online documents. So that one will be the secondary data. Contoh paling mudah, data COVID-19 di Malaysia. Every day kita dapat data COVID dalam bentuk infographics, kan? Alright, so bila keluar data tersebut pada pukul 5 petang, bilangan kes positif, bilangan orang meninggal, bilangan kes sembuh, data-data itu yang dalam bentuk infografik telah di-collected, processed and published. So that one will be the secondary data. So what is the primary data? In this case, primary data adalah yang dekat klinik, yang buat swab test, positif, negatif, negatif dekat klinik itu saja. Kumpul negatif planet lain semua tu. Alright, so that one is primary data. Bila kumpul semua tu, campur semua, dah jadi secondary data lah bila dah publish. Kan? Alright. So what is the advantage, kelebihan primary data? Bila kita secara direct, kita buat interview, kita dapat daripada Google Form, kita tak kacau apa-apa lagi, it is more accurate and up to date, lebih terkini. Right? And it satisfy the research objective. Kalau kita nak kaji pencapaian belajar, kita dah dapat. Kita dah tahu kita nak tanya apa, so kita dapat data itu. So it satisfy research objective, objektif kajian kita. Right? Dan it explain how the figures were gathered. Macam mana nilai-nilai itu dikumpulkan. Macam mana kita dapat. Kita tahu. Tetapi jika kita menggunakan secondary data, kita tengok disadvantages of secondary data, it may contain errors. Mungkin mengandungi kesilapan. Kan orang lain buat data, kita tak tahu di belakang dia, mungkin ada tersilap tambah satu kurang satu and so on. So it may contain errors. The relevancy is unsure, meaning to say that kita tak sure. Data yang dikumpulkan oleh orang lain tadi, relevan tak untuk kajian kita? Kita tak sure. Dia relevan tak? Dia kutip data macam ni, kita tak tahu. So kita payah ambil je. Itu kelemahan dia lah. Right. And it also may not fulfill our research objective. Kan? Kita nak data ini tapi yang ada dekat online tu data macam tu. Mungkin tidak memenuhi cita rasa kita. So it may not fulfill our research objective. But the secondary data has its own advantages. For example, less time, less cost and less effort to collect the data. Untuk kumpul data tadi, kurang masa, kurang kos dan kurang tenaga untuk kita cari. Kan? Sebab kita hanya balik internet, semua dapat. Always available. Once in the internet, always available. Kan? Right. But these advantages, right, of primary data lawan kepada itu. Okay. Very costly. Nak pergi buat survey ni, kita nak pergi survey sendiri, kena print kertas and so on, cost, makan cost. Yang kedua, time consuming, makan masa berminggu-minggu. Dan yang ketiga, lot of manpower. Kadang-kadang kena pakai enumerator, kena upah orang untuk pergi buat survey. Kan? Right. So that's basically the difference between primary data and secondary data. Harap you lebih nampak dan jelas. In the next video, kita akan tengok kepada types of variables. Thank you for watching.